Before that. Yeah. I'm crashing and disavowing no knowledge of the entire world. That's how I feel after October 16th, because I'm sharing that NAACP reading thought, and I had to create.
Oh, thank you.
pages today.
We got to shoot that at Del Gardens.
Beside myself with- I hate it.
Good evening, everybody. We'll call this meeting of the Delta Township Board to order. Will the board members and guests please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Trustee Mohica. Here. Trustee Cascarella.
Present.
Trustee Brewer.
Present.
Trustee Bowen.
Present.
Treasurer Fedewa. Clerk Clark is present. Supervisor Fletcher.
Here.
You have quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Next up is set the agenda. Any additions or deletions? If not, a motion to approve. Funda,
A motion to approve the agenda as presented.
is there support? There
Support.
is support. All those in favor of approving the agenda as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. In your package, you have a couple communications of some local video service franchise agreements between ATT Michigan and Delta Township. Now we're down to public comment. Anybody in the audience this evening like to speak on any topic? Now is your opportunity to come forward and speak. Anybody here to speak? Seeing no one coming forward, we'll continue with the agenda. Introduction of ordinances, introduction to small cell ordinance. The manager's office recommends that the board introduce the proposed ordinance amendments pertaining to Article 3 to Chapter 36 of the Delta Township Code of Ordinances pertaining to small cell wireless facilities. What's the pleasure of the board? Andrea?
I move that the Delta Township Board introduce a proposed ordinance amendment adding Article 3 to Chapter 36 of the Delta Township Code of Ordinances pertaining to small cell wireless facilities. The township clerk is hereby directed to advertise this introduction in local newspapers with a final action on the proposed ordinance amendment scheduled for October 18, 2021 Township Board meeting. Support.
It's been moved and supported. Andrea, didn't you at a previous meeting declare that you had a client?
Oh, gosh. I do have a client that's in the communications infrastructure. Yeah, so I can withdraw my motion.
If you'll do a friendly, I will do your motion for you.
And just for the record, not at all engaged in this, but
Sure.
yes, I do recognize that.
And Trustee Bowen.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's been moved by Mary now, supported by Trustee Bowen that we introduce this ordinance. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will call the roll. Did you, Andrea, want to ask
I
for
will.
discussion?
Abstain, I think I need to, correct?
Yeah.
And the board has to approve it.
Yes, we do. Yeah, so you're requesting for abstention based on you have a client in your lobby firm that is a communications firm that would be impacted by small cells.
Yes.
So I guess I don't know if we need a motion, but a vote on the request to abstain. So if we
So
need a
moved.
motion, we'll say Fonda has moved, and is there support?
Support.
There is support. All those in favor of approving the abstention, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. So you can abstain, Andrea, and the clerk may please call the roll.
Clerk is yes. Trustee Bowen.
Yes.
Trustee Brewer.
Yes.
Trustee Cascarella is an abstention. Trustee Mohica.
Yes.
Treasurer Fedewa. Supervisor Fletcher.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Moving now down to the consent agenda. I know there's been questions about the September 20th minutes, so we'll pull those. Are there any other items that people would like to see pulled or a motion to approve as?
I just had a question. Did we move that actual item? I know we took care of Andrea's issue, but I don't know if we moved. Did we move the communications?
We just had a roll
Yes,
call vote.
sorry,
on this,
yes.
yeah.
That's all. That's why I had my hand up. Sorry about that.
I request item number 12 be removed for discussion.
What was that?
Number 12,
Okay. Any other? So a motion to approve with those changes? It's been moved. And is there support? Support has been moved and supported to approve the rest of the items. Madam Clerk, please call the roll on approving the consent agenda.
Trustee Brewer made the motion. I'm trying to catch up with.
Trustee Brewer,
Yes.
Clerk Clark is yes. Supervisor Fletcher.
Yes.
Trustee Bowen,
yes.
trustee Cascarella,
Yes.
trustee Mohica,
Yes.
treasurer Fidela. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Now we move to the items removed for discussion, the September 20th minutes. It appears that Treasurer Fidela has a problem with the sentence, Treasurer Fidela declined to proceed without trustee Bowen's motion being approved. I think that deleting that sentence, then approving it as is would be fine. So I will make that motion. Is there support?
Support.
There is support. Any discussion? Does that satisfy the problem?
Yes, and I'd just like to say that I was the one who suggested this. I read it and thought,
What is that?
I was the one who suggested striking that sentence and then adding this. It wasn't how I remembered it, and so I went back to the recording and just wrote down everything that I heard, so.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Now we move to item number 12, the appointment of Kelvin Jones to the Corridor Improvement Authority. And we asked the attorney to review, and the attorney came back, Jessica Wood, who is here this evening, recommended that we could go forward with the appointment of Kelvin Jones. So I would so move that we approve his appointment. Is there support?
Support.
There is support. Discussion.
I went back and pulled the items that we were given when the candidates were first interviewed. And Mr. Jones's application lists him, it says, do you have an ownership or business interest in property within the CIA development area? And he checked no. And on this table provided by our consultant, he is listed down here under the at-large members. And there are 4 other business owners who were interviewed that I'm just wondering why we aren't considering replacing Mr. Bean, the business owner, with another business owner.
We are a business representative that feeds the ordinance. And since we're well into the process, having somebody with Kelvin Jones' experience, having served on the Lansing Brownfield Board and other economic development agencies, somebody who understood these proposals. And do we have a dog in the room here? But I recommend Kelvin Jones because he was somebody who could hit the ground running as opposed to somebody who was totally new to these concepts, trying to step in after things had already started moving, and they'll just have a much harder time to really play a role and contribute. So Kelvin can hit the job running. So that's why I recommend him.
Okay, and none of the rest of these people have none of the rest of the business owners have any experience with that?
Not at the same level as Kelvin Jones, no.
Okay.
He's certainly above and beyond them.
And he stated, I don't know if he's here this evening, no, and did he state at our last meeting or when he came up that LBWI authorized him as a representative?
That who? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I'm sorry, did the Board of Water and Light authorize Mr. Jones as a representative of their interests?
He definitely has permission from his employers to serve,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, so he will be acting as a representative of the utility. Okay.
Any other discussion? See none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll on approving Kelvin Jones to the CIA board.
Supervisor Fletcher.
Yes.
Trustee Mohica,
Yes.
trustee Bowen,
No.
trustee Brewer,
Yes.
trustee Cascarella,
Yes.
treasurer Fidela, clerk Clark is yes. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Now we move to the items of business. First is up item number 16, set the public hearing for Delta Township Saginaw CIA Development TIF Plan. Manager's office recommends that the board set the public hearing date for Monday, November 15th at 6 p.m. And I believe we have Suzanne Schultz here to present and walk us through the recommendation of the CIA board.
Good evening. Gonna pull my presentation up here. See if we can. I can have permission to share my screen. Okay, and I don't know, can you see my screen on your screens? Seeing if it comes up. I'm screen sharing, so people on the Zoom call can see it.
But we can't. Sorry.
So we're working on the technology. I'll briefly address the memo that was provided to you for this evening. It really is done in, I would say, 3 parts. The first part was generally describing the development and TIF plan and what it is and isn't. And Jessica Wood is also here to talk about the development and TIF plan in comparison to the development and reimbursement agreement. So when we talk about the agreement with the private developer versus the development and TIF plan, I think it's really important that we separate those two, and we can talk about that some more. The second part in the memo talked about how the Corridor Improvement Authority Board developed their recommendation, and thinking about the different parts and pieces. We had discussed the variables that go into developing these calculations and what needs to be considered. And so the narrative was provided about what it is, what the variable is, or what it does, why they made the recommendation and what their recommendation was. And then that is evident in the tables that are included in the appendices. And then the third part of the memo addressed the questions that the authority board had after they had the opportunity to review and discuss. So the process to date had been, we had our joint meeting with the township board and the authority board, had that discussion, particularly around development projects, what kind of projects you wanted to see and how that would happen. And then at that meeting, the township board also had some discussion. There was a table that was shared at the very end of the meeting. So understanding it was at the end, but kind of talking about 15, 20, 25 or 30 years, kind of what does that mean when we think about timeline? And then the authority board went and we focused on the variables. What are the components when we're thinking about a plan that we have to recognize in addition to the projects list that really help determine whether or not what's going to be developed eventually into the TIF plan is feasible. And the state law is really clear on, you have to make sure everything balances, right? Your revenues and expenditures, that where the money's coming from and that those eligible expenses meet the standards under the law. And so we looked at that and how those came to be, and that informed the drafting of the development and TIF plan. We came back to the authority board, provided them with a copy of the development and TIF plan, went through section by section with them, addressed any questions, and had some recommended amendments, which we made. And then we also encouraged the authority board to provide us with any questions that they might have in addition to the discussion that had occurred once they had a chance to think about it and think about what else might they want to know. And even in discussions with others, what else would help them make a decision on the development and TIF plan, or if there was something that we had forgotten. And so the list of questions that were in the memo were provided by the development and TIF, I'm sorry, but were provided by the authority board. And we spent the last meeting before they made their recommendation to you as the township board discussing those questions and working through and resolving those and trying to figure out, things such as interest and how things worked. And again, how we were parsing through what's in the development and TIF plan versus what's going to be in the development agreement with the developer. So that was kind of the process that the authority board took in thinking through that and in those discussions. And looks like is that your precedence?
I'm
You
doing
loaded
it from
it
my
up?
computer.
That's
Sorry.
fine. Nope,
about
it's
that.
fine.
They have a glitch here.
Good thing I sent it. So
I'll just watch your slide. So
okay.
you can still share if you want. And
So
I'll
people
watch it and
can
I'll just advance it. Yeah.
Okay. So is it easier if I advance it on mine and then you follow, or does that work? Okay.
Mhm.
Whoops, I'm sorry. Then I should have. It was too quick to cancel it out. So that was the general process that we used. And so tonight, what I'd like to do to give you an overview of what we're doing and what the facets were, since it's been provided to you in writing, but wanted for the general public to see, and then to build that understanding and see if there's any additional questions. So there's really three major components or concepts that we wanted to make sure that are understood when we talk about development and TIF plans. The way this was written is that development and TIF plans, this one that you have before you, is for only infrastructure in public rights of way and easements. So it doesn't pay for a private developer to build their project. It only pays for public infrastructure. And a good example of why you'd want it to pay for public infrastructure, if you think about, there's been private developments that have occurred where they have the street and they're responsible for the street. And the street may have now potholes and it's in poor condition because they built it once and then they didn't think about the future. And then now they've got this liability and maintenance, and you're getting calls as township board members to fix the street, and it's not your street. In this case, this is basically paying for streets, sidewalks, water, sewer, those kinds of things. So that's what it's limited to pay for. Second big thing is that monies can only be spent within the development area by the township on those properties from which increment is being collected. So if you're going to you're going to capture TIF from a developer, then that developer can be reimbursed some of that money. Okay. Or you can spend it on something else that the township has interest in, but you can't spend money with another private developer unless it's very clear on how you're going to do that. So examples include township wishes to install improvements for pedestrians along Saginaw Highway. That's an eligible expense because that's within the development area. So if you go to the map, just reminding you where the development area is defined. So the money's captured from those several properties, the way the plan is written, you can spend it anywhere in there on public improvements in your rights of ways and easements. If you want to upgrade the infrastructure, for example, in Lansing Mall, which is identified here, it's a public infrastructure improvement. You're not giving the Lansing Mall developer the money. You're paying for the streets or sidewalks, or reimbursing the developer for that. But those are public infrastructure components. And then the third component to remember is that a development and reimbursement agreement is a tool to define the public-private partnership arrangement where a developer has paid for the public infrastructure ahead of time. And they're using that to build it instead of the public monies. So you don't have to bond for an infrastructure improvement. The developer's paying for that infrastructure. And this is a reimbursement mechanism to pay back that developer for the investment they paid ahead of time for the public. So, and how they get paid back is all in the development and reimbursement agreement. So it's a contractual agreement later between you and the developer that is not part of the development plan. Okay, so does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to just briefly cover development, the development plan. So the key part of this, it all starts with, we've defined the development area. So that peachy colored area on the map that we defined back in May, we've defined that. The development plan is really, if you think about it almost as your master plan, like that's your vision for the future about what you might like to do, what you could do, what you think 20 years from now might happen. But it's a vision. It's not overly prescriptive. And where we get into that level of prescription about what projects are going to happen, that happens on an annual basis as the authority board is creating their budget and as the township board approves that budget. So it's a list of ideas that it's your best guess, because nobody has a crystal ball. I mean, you've got pandemics and great recessions and all these other things that happen that you can't possibly anticipate. So it's understanding that it's a framework to be able to serve as a guide, to know where you're hoping to head, but you don't quite know. And even in your creation of your projects list, you identified in your projects, the very first thing you want to do is a quarter plan to get the public's input and to be able to think about what that future looks like. And that can also drive your projects list. So just keep in mind that it's kind of a big picture. It's setting a framework with some bumpers on it about what you're going to do as far as the infrastructure and public rights of ways and easements and kind of what you'd like to be able to facilitate, but that's about it. I mean, it's really pretty general. On the next slide, the TIF plan, to do a TIF plan, to be able to capture the monies, to be able to implement your vision, to be able to have those resources to do something to advance the corridor, you need those resources to happen. So the state law says you should have a development plan that, again, kind of expressing what the general vision is, but again, it's the best you can do, knowing that there's lots of things that can happen along the way. And it really kind of starts to set those parameters for where are you going to collect the taxes and what are you hoping for your projects, and making sure that those are balanced. But the big headline in the TIF plan is your ceiling, is the most that you're ever going to collect, and then kind of how you're going to collect it. So there it starts to set that range of things that are possible. But again, within that ceiling, anything in there as far as how the money goes, how it flows, to what contractual agreements over that time period you want to make as a township board, which projects you decide you're going to pick and select, and with the recommendation of the authority board, those things are really pretty fluid, which is in some cases for some people unsettling, but also gives you that flexibility and ability to be nimble in a way that you don't want to paint yourself into a corner and not be able to achieve the things or leverage the types of projects you want to. So for example, if MDOT came along and said, we would love to do a boulevard, and you'd say, we'd love to do a boulevard and we would like to see more pedestrian improvements, this gives you the resources to be able to do that. If you had already committed on your projects list every single penny and you knew exactly what you're going to do, you would lose that ability to be as nimble and to know where you want to be able to spend your money. You'll have an idea, like we want to improve the road, but exactly what that is and how much that's going to cost is really an unknown. So in the TIF plan contents, we look at the tax increment revenues for each of the year of the plan, the cost of the plan anticipated to be paid from the increment revenues received, use of or a part or all of the captured assessed value. So kind of what you think it's going to be and how long it's going to be for. And so those kind of criteria lead us to the TIF plan variables. So I mentioned that second part of the memo that there was discussion on the part of the authority board about what they were going to spend and how they were going to, suggest that we spend it and how do we create this plan. The project list that was developed, this was from the joint meeting between the township board and the authority board, talks about kind of these major priorities. These were just major buckets that we ended up putting together, but planning related activities, including a corridor study, market studies, branding, business attraction and retention, pedestrian safety studies. Some of those softer costs are identified, but then also streetscape, knowing that Saginaw Highway is a major priority. The boulevard design and being involved in the construction and design of that, non-motorized improvements, investigating the feasibility of burying power lines, gateway improvements, put Lansing Mall infrastructure improvements as a guess, identifying that as the project list, but again, it's going to depend on what you get and the criteria that you want to use to give that to someone. So, and what I meant to be able to facilitate the development in the way of infrastructure. That can come with other criteria. So if someone on Lansing Mall wanted to do a self-storage building, you're like, that doesn't meet our vision. You're not committing anything to that developer until you have a development agreement. So what's in the plan is what you're hoping for. You're hoping to see the redevelopment of the Lansing Mall, for example, but you also want to make sure you're getting what you want. So it doesn't say you're getting a blank check. So we had the project priority list, so that gave us the total dollar amount for the township, what you would like to see in projects. Then the second choice was administration. What are the administrative costs associated with implementing and carrying forward the authority board's work, such as staff time, legal costs, accounting. There are requirements for doing accounting every year and making that transparent to the public about where those resources are being spent. And it shouldn't be at the cost of the township general operating fund. And so the township manager and finance director looked at how much it would generally cost, and they came up with a recommendation of 2% as an annual fee for administration. Contingency is another line item that is used to think about unanticipated costs. Now, we know right now that using contingencies, and no matter how much anybody could have anticipated a 2% or a 10% contingency in a project, when you have construction costs going through the roof, it's not always foolproof, but it tries to give you a little bit of a cushion. And the recommendation that is being provided by the authority board is that you have a maximum contingency rate of 10% for the township and 0% for private development. So if you're going to work with Delta Crossings, they zeroed out the contingency as a recommendation. Pass-through, a lot of discussion has happened already on pass-through that you're familiar with as the township board. The authority board had a lot of discussion about this, trying to understand the pass-through, wanting to know if the pass-through was necessary, if it would be better to do 0 and look at doing a shorter timeline, for example, to 15 years. That math has been done, and I have a example of that if you're interested. But they wanted to really understand the pass-through, and so their kind of the message that was sent to them was like 20% would be really great. But it also exceeds what any other communities have gotten so far or been given for a pass-through. Pass-throughs are generally 2 to 5% or 0, especially with downtown development authority. So I have a table if you're interested to show that, but the authority board decided to keep the 20% pass-through. So what that means is that if you froze time right now for the tax base, currently all of the taxing jurisdictions get the money they currently get now. And the 20% pass-through says, once you have, if you had an increase, they get another 20% of that increase that also goes into their pot every year. Duration, there was some of that. I mentioned that early table when we had the joint board meetings. But the duration was gone through a couple different variations to see if it could get down to 15. It doesn't work very well. And really one of the things, and when you think about duration, is a typical lifespan of a master plan is 20 years. And if you're looking at the rotation of transportation or major infrastructure projects, you're always on like a 3 to 5 year timeline to design it, to finally get it to bid, to actually go and build it. You're looking at least 3 years. That's MDOT's time, that's the base time window. But if you want to get ahead of it, you could look at 5 years. So you don't have a whole lot of turns when you start thinking about these chunks of time to do infrastructure and how you think about the duration of the plan. So we had some discussion on that, but that was the duration recommendation is 20 years. The TIF capture areas is the other piece. So the geography, you'll remember we had a brief discussion about this when we had the joint session, and on the map you can see we talked about both Delta Crossings, the I property, which is also called Brookside Crossings, and the Lansing Mall. And going back up to the long narrative on the slide, but when we talked about those, we were talking about how the I property for Brookside Crossings was similar to Delta Crossings. There was an agreement with the courts about kind of what could be developed there in the future. And when we took a deeper look at that property and compared it to Delta Crossings, they were pretty comparable. And what's interesting with this plan is we actually had the ability to know what Delta Crossings was building and the costs associated with that, and then working with the assessor with the anticipated revenue for tax dollars could come from that. Most corridor improvement authority plans don't have that benefit. They don't have the benefit of a real life project of that size to be able to work from. So you're making a lot of kind of best guesses. In this case, we have the Delta Crossings project where we can work with those numbers and actually also apply those numbers to Brookside Crossings as an estimate of what we think might happen based off of the development plan that they have. So it made sense to include in the recommendation Brookside Crossings into the project for a TIF capture area. And then Lansing Mall, we also had discussions about Lansing Mall. And Lansing Mall is a different story. Lansing Mall, as you know, has filed a tax appeal. Their property values are depreciating. And so that's a liability for the authority to try to capture taxes that are declining. So it didn't make any sense to do that. And then also when we think about the redevelopment potential of Lansing Mall, it actually works better if you think about using your brownfield authority to be able to do demolition and asbestos abatement. And then if it fit the bill for you, it's recognized in the development and TIF plan that the infrastructure to facilitate redevelopment of the Lansing Mall could be something that you'd want to allocate resources towards. So the Lansing Mall is not included as a TIF capture area. Interest was another variable that was addressed, and the brownfield policy allows for 5% simple interest to be accrued for projects. The Delta Township Brownfield Authority allows for 4%. 4% was carried through in this project. But you can also think about that. So it's in the plan. It's recognized that it's 4% in the plan, but you can set a cap on the amount of interest to be collected. You can think about that interest and how it gets spent when you do your budgeting and you do your development agreements. So it's in there, but I don't think whether it's for the township or for developers. That's an area where there was a lot of discussion also with the authority board about how do you address interest. This next slide is the example that was shown as far as the 15 to 20 to 25 and 30 years and what that meant. 20 seems to be the sweet spot as we've gone through the numbers and taking into all of those variables into account. And just to keep in mind, the caveat on the next slide is that all those numbers are also based on the presumption that the other taxing jurisdictions, the library, LCC, the county, will all be willing to participate in the corridor improvement authority. It's hoped that with the 20% pass through, that is attractive to them and that they will be getting more than they would otherwise. We have to keep in mind that the infrastructure is helping to facilitate additional development. So without the infrastructure, you don't have the additional development, therefore you don't have the additional tax dollars. And the other part of it, even talking to the library board last month, this discussion about how do you get the resources needed to reinvest in the east side of the corridor? How do you make a targeted decision about how you're going to use your resources? And then how does that also benefit those taxing jurisdictions? Because if you don't have reinvestment happening on the east end, those tax dollars, as you're already seeing, will start to continue to decline. And as they continue to decline, what tools do you have at your disposal to be able to kind of try to get more investment to happen and really spur it? And unfortunately, a township like Delta Township, you don't have the same tools like the city of Lansing does. You know, these core communities have different tools available to them from economic incentives that you don't have access to because you don't qualify, you don't meet the criteria. So the Corridor Improvement Authority does provide that vehicle and those resources that you would not otherwise have to think about reinvestment in areas that have disinvestment, that don't have the resources that you want to see have happen to maintain and hopefully increase that tax base. So there is a story and there is a reason why it makes sense for the taxing jurisdictions to think about this as an investment in the future and maintaining and increasing and growing the tax base from all the other properties that you have there. If you'll remember at the very beginning of the process, when we looked at the tax values and whether it made sense to capture taxes in the entire district, your whole increase in tax capture was like $30,000 for the year off of all those parcels that were all peach. So that's not good. And like I mentioned before, I worked with Plainfield Township and their CIA went defunct because they didn't have a revenue source. because they didn't have the redevelopment to capture those monies. So I think that the taxing jurisdictions in having those discussions will feel more comfort if they know how you're going to invest it. And they can even be part of those decisions in your conversations. So from a timeline standpoint, the development TIF plan, it kind of highlighted the big things that comprise the tables. The numbers are in the appendices. I don't know if you have any specific questions about what's in the development TIF plans, but from a timeline standpoint, tonight we'd be asking you to set the public hearing. And then you would be holding your public hearing on the 15th. And then once you have that public hearing and you hear the public comment, if there are some things that you would want to see changed or you have additional revisions for some reason, then we would do that after the public hearing, and then it would come back to the township board for final approval of the plan. And that's it. Sorry, it's a lot of information, but I wanted to make sure you had all of it.
Well, it is a lot of information, Suzanne. We certainly appreciate that you've been involved in helping and serving as a consultant for the township as we move forward on this process. And I just want to clarify too, for the record, you have been hired by the consultant or by the township to be our consultant to work with us as we craft this plan. So the plan's not being drafted by the developer or anything like that. It's being developed by our township with our consultant, who is a well-known documented expert on these topics.
Yes, I'm right. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I always makes me uncomfortable, but yes. And I will say that the developer, I know there was a newspaper story. The developer was not in the room when the development and TIF plan was recommended by the authority board for the developer for Delta Crossing. So to avoid conflict, the authority board does have bylaws that the township board adopted, and those were respected to try to keep those bright lines.
And I know I've been impressed by the work of the CIA board. I know these various variables that we are dealing with here. I know this board has been dealing with them for over a year now in terms of discussion and walking through what the options are. But the CIA board, I know, had them for a shorter amount of time. And I know I've been very impressed by the level of the questions and the engagement that has come from members. I know that at the CIA board, there was thorough discussions of all these variables. Why 20 years? Why are we recommending a 20% pass through? How was the administrative fees figured? How was interest determined? All these various variables that you got to decide on to put into a plan were all very well debated and discussed. So there certainly was no rubber stamping of any plan going on, that everybody was very engaged in asking some very intelligent and knowledgeable questions when that was when they put together the recommendation to us.
Yeah, you've got a really great authority board. It's a really smart group. I mean, some of them have experience from creating or being involved with DDAs and TIF districts. Peggy, I mean, you've just got a really great, thoughtful group. Tony McGaldy, who's a property owner and has been involved in development and understands. He's asked a lot of questions, and Scott Berman. I mean, they've all been very dynamic in the questions they've asked and the conversations they've had.
And I know there's been some comments that people may not like the recommendation from the CIA board, but that's okay, because how the process is drafted, a CIA board makes a recommendation. You hold a hearing, you get public input. Then after this board has received both the recommendation, the public input, we can sit down and come up with whatever plan we think is in the best interest of the township. So we don't have to all agree with every part of the recommendation from the CIA board initially, because at the end of the day, this board can take whatever action we want in terms of establishing this plan. Is that correct?
That's correct. And Jessica may have some additional input as well. I really think about it as the authority board is very much like the planning commission. It's an administrative body that you've identified, you've appointed these people to serve the township board. And so they are making a recommendation just as if the planning commission was making a zoning recommendation. And so from a process standpoint, you receive that rezoning recommendation, you hold a public hearing, and then you discuss. And so that's really the procedure. The same thing applies here.
And the procedure is laid out by state law and how this happens. You don't get to make up your own process, your own procedure. There's a procedure, you must follow it, and that's how you work through if you choose to go down and do this, to establish an authority like this.
Correct. And I'll have Jessica respond to that as well, because I think she would.
You want to come up,
she's-
Jessica? You can
she
come on
would
up
be
and
great
just
to do
join her
that.
at the microphone. That may be best to have you both there as questions come forward.
Okay.
I have a question.
I'm having technology issues, so I'm not like looking at Instagram or something. I'm looking at the statute. So just so you know, nice to meet you. I'm Jessica Wood from Dickinson, right? And we represent a lot of corridor improvement authorities and other types of taxing jurisdictions. And I thought it might be helpful. It's already been said, actually, a lot of it by Suzanne, so I might be repeating a few things. And also your summary was very accurate, so I might be repeating that. But I thought it might be helpful to talk about a couple of different things with regard to this corridor improvement authority. One, the difference between the development plan, the TIF plan, and the development agreement, which is a different animal that we get to later on in the process if you decide to move forward with your plan. So the development plan, and this is all in the statute, it's not discretionary, it's all in the statute. So if you're going to do this, there's a procedure laid out and you got to follow it. The development plan really projects what you envision. It's kind of like a master plan or a roadmap for the activities that you anticipate undertaking in the name of economic development. It doesn't mean you're going to accomplish everything in there, but you are limited to the authorities listed within the statute. You can't go outside of those authorized powers. And almost on a daily basis, we're asked to check and see, now, is this one of our authorized powers or not? Because they're not that broad. The TIF plan, by contrast, is sort of how you're going to finance these concepts in the development plan, because you have to have a budget for it, or at least an anticipated estimated budget, which is really all that you have normally when you're first creating these authorities. As Suzanne mentioned, usually you've got a blank slate. You guys have some projects, on the horizon possibly, but oftentimes you're setting these up just in the hopes that a project will come. So a lot of times the TIF plans are very much estimates. Hopeful estimates. And then the financing activities are laid out in the statute. Again, how you can finance things. And it's not just through tax capture. You can specially assess, you can take donations, you can do all sorts of different things in order to obtain the financing to actually undertake the projects in the development plan. But it's very important to note that you can't do anything unless it's within the plan. And normally your plan is adopted as a joint development and TIF plan as one. So when I refer to the plan, I mean, both of them are usually adopted together. And it absolutely has to be in your plan or it can't be done. And it has to be authorized by the statute as well. And the expenditures have to be within the development area. So those are a few restrictions that you always have to do a check every time they're looking to do something. And as Suzanne mentioned, you're limited to expenditures that fall within the category of public infrastructure. And that's something that is really important to note. The definition of public infrastructure, again, is within the statute, and there's a list. And the things that you want to undertake have to be listed within that definition. And the reason that you have to do that analysis is because, generally speaking, if you don't have a taxing authority like this, if you don't have a public purpose and statutory authority, you can't simply spend taxpayer dollars by giving them or reimbursing developers for anything. You don't have the authority to do that. You absolutely have to have one of these statutes implemented by setting up an authority in order to have the legal authority to spend it toward economic development like this. So those are the two different, aspects of the plan. The third step then, if you choose, one of the authorized expenditures would be to enter into a development agreement. And that's just like what it sounds like. It's a contract with a developer. You have the authority, once you've adopted your plan properly and followed the notice, the hearing, and all the other requirements, you have the authority to reimburse them for certain eligible expenditures. And that detail is all laid out in a contract that we call the development agreement. And that comes later, if you so choose. And it is just like any other contract, it's negotiated. So it's up to you, the contents of it, how much you want to reimburse. We definitely always have them be subject to actual tax capture. I've seen a few that weren't, and those are problematic. You can put several different reasonable conditions in there. So it's like any other contract, but again, that comes later. And you don't even get there unless and until you have a plan that's been properly adopted and it includes this, at least the concept of this particular project. So that's a separate piece of this. And then I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. I have a step sheet and I know Suzanne included the steps also in her memo, so you've probably seen these several times. I have a sort of a bullet point step sheet that you can use as you see fit with dates. Very specifically sets forth the statute. And I just want to refer to it for 1 minute. So where you are in the process, and again, this has been mentioned a few different times, you appointed an authority board and they have created and they're now recommending to you consideration of this draft plan. So the statute very specifically sets out sort of a nitpicky procedure, frankly, for going forward from here on out. And that's where we can help you with our step sheet because you can't miss any of the steps. The first thing for you to do now is to set your public hearing, and there are very picky notice requirements that accompany that, and a specific notice, which if you decide to go forward and set this public hearing, we can provide that to you. It has to contain certain elements. You have to provide notice by publishing it twice, a certain amount of days in advance. You have to post it and you have to mail it. So there's a lot of notice requirements that go into this. And then it very specifically says in the statute that only after that public hearing, at that stage, you have the discretion to either vote to approve it, vote to modify it as you see fit, or to reject it. So those are your options after the public hearing. At that point, there are a few more procedural steps, and then it becomes part of your local law. And so that's the procedure that has to happen. It's if you want to be able to use this tool. If you do nothing, then it never comes to be. If you don't have a properly adopted plan, then your corridor improvement authority can't do anything because the authority really comes from within the plan itself. Any questions at this point? I know it's a lot.
I know that we've had some questions. Clerk Clark has been waiting, and Suzanne, you can also be up too if you want.
Actually, Andrea raised her hand first, so I'll
Oh,
go first.
I just have, most of my questions were answered, but I'm just gonna kind of follow up to have a clarifying one, just because I think I heard this correctly. But the statute requires that the TIF plan include the development plan?
It's not required, no, but most people do them together. So
Can
Is
you
that-
just clarify for me the timing of when the development plan and when the TIF plan are to be completed, approved, how that process, if they're not done together, what?
if they're not done together, we so rarely see them done separately, but you could go through the entire process to adapt that I sort of just went through in terms of the posting, the public hearing and so forth, and just do the development plan. But you would have to do that all over again for the TIFA plan. And you could-
Is it, I'm sorry if I can real quick, does the development plan have to occur before the TIF plan can then?
Well, let me put it this way, both are required. So it doesn't really matter what order you do them in, but it would be awfully hard as a practical matter to come up with a TIF plan unless you had your objectives spelled out in a development plan.
Understood.
Yeah, so they're two sides of the same coin, sort of. So you got, what you want to do and how you're going to pay for it. So,
Yeah.
And again, that's why as a practical matter, when at the point of initial adoption, I don't think I've ever seen them done separately. Where you see them dealt with separately is when it comes time to amend, because remember, any amendment comes back up to you guys. And so sometimes people just want to amend their TIFA plan and sometimes, or TIF plan, and sometimes they just want to amend the development plan. And then, of course, there's also districts that can be amended. So that's when you see them separated out.
But you can't have a TIF plan without a development plan. You can have a development plan with
Yeah,
no money.
I guess, right. And so to
And that's
understand your
what I
question,
Yeah,
okay, you
you
wouldn't,
can have a development plan with no money, but you have to have to do the TIF plan, you have to have a development.
yeah, as a practical matter, that's true. I can't think of when you would, yeah, how would
Okay.
you would develop your budget if you didn't know what you were gonna put in it.
Thank you for
Yeah,
clarifying
yeah.
that.
That's it? Okay, Mary.
Okay, just, so for, in the very most simplistic language, the TIF plan raises the money, the development plan spends it. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but just so bear in mind, there are other ways to raise money too, but
Right,
yes,
right.
different, yeah,
But-
okay.
But that generally, when we're talking about the TIF plan and the development plan, that's kind of their major role.
Mhm.
Okay, so move on down the line. When, because my interest area that I have expressed from the beginning of this process is still yet to be dealt with. And it is my understanding that the developer reimbursement plan or agreement, I should say not plan, agreement, comes after approval of the TIF and the development plan. So can you give me a general idea, Suzanne, of when that is? So we've gotten all these dates.
Yep.
So and I know that comes from, it'll come from Dickinson, right? You'll be responsible for drafting it with.
I'll draft it on your
Conversation,
behalf
right.
and not to jump in here, but I mean, it could happen as soon as you would want it to after your plan goes into effect.
Okay,
So,
But your plan goes into effect, so you want to make sure that all the money that you anticipate being there is there first. So that's where the taxing jurisdictions come in.
Right.
So
right.
once you have your plan, like you've made your commitment to it, right? Because it's also your tax capture, right?
Mhm.
So once the township's in on it, then you want to have LCC, the county and the library, those agreements in place so that you know actually how much money you will actually have.
Okay.
Then you can step back and go, okay, developer, now we'll enter into a contract with you because we know based on these estimates, how much we're going to have. But you can start negotiating with the developer before, you just don't authorize it, approve it as a body
Right.
until,
Yeah,
but you can have those discussions sooner than later. You don't have to wait till it's all done. Jessica could start the process tomorrow. I mean, it's just speculation until
But
you authorize it.
to go back to that date you had of December 15th or whatever it
Yep.
was. So rationally, you would start that after that vote. Correct? You
Yeah,
would start drafting.
yeah, unless you're pretty sure that it's gonna happen. Yeah, you could, as a practical matter, start talking before then, but that would be when it would become a certainty that you'd even have
Right,
the plan, right?
yeah, okay. Oh, wait,
Yeah, and we have like standard development agreements that we use for both DDAs and corridor improvement authorities, which are similar creatures, sort of. And so we have a lot of standard provisions within those, and that's probably how we'd start, is that we would show that to you and say, what do you like? What do you not like? Do you want to add anything? And we would begin negotiations.
and that developer reimbursement plan or agreement, I should say, comes back to the board, the full board for approval.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Thank you.
It's something totally separate from this plan. So this plan, what we've put in the plan is what we think might happen, right? That we're anticipating based on, I mean, there's been discussions already with the township board, with the developer about, what that might happen. So that's what made it into the plan. But once the plan is done, that money is in a big pot. And you can decide how you're going to, I mean, you express some intent, but you're not committed to that until you have a contract.
Okay,
So this isn't a contract with the developer. This is a plan for the authority board.
thank you.
Other questions? Fonda?
Thank you.
Okay, just a few here, so bear with me as I walk through this. Suzanne, your team developed the plan and presented it to the CIA.
We
Correct.
wrote the plan. We did have assistance on the tables from Eric Helzer, who is also working with the developer.
Okay, and Eric is whom? Okay, Eric. And Eric is employed by whom?
He's hired by the developer, right, from Delta Crossings.
And what was Eric's role again?
So Eric assisted with the tables
The
that are in
financial
the
tables.
appendices.
Is that, when you say tables, were those the TIF tables?
Yes.
Okay, so all of that was done. And when we look at the administrative fee, the 2%, will we be paying Eric at that time? Will there be a need for Eric once this is approved, if this is approved? Will Eric still be needed to update the tables? And will Eric be paid by Chris's company? Or will we take on that administrative responsibility to pay Eric?
Once the plan is done and the TIF plan's done, there's really, unless you find a need to go back into the development and TIF plan, it's done. There's no need to go back and amend it. You're then into the world of doing your annual budget. So this is just really setting up the framework for the authority board and what you think will happen. But going back into those tables and doing those calculations, that will be the annual budget, and we'll be working with your assessor and actually when the projects come in, and the assessor can guide you on, for example, let's say you had a multi-year project coming in and there was a big request from MDOT on Saginaw Highway, and you were going to have to say, okay, well, in the next 3 years, we're going to commit $200,000 a year to this. You'd work with the assessor to make sure that he'd anticipate the tax revenue would be coming in to support that. So Eric, and I will say that the developer has the most to lose in this if the tables are wrong, right? So if the tables are wrong and that revenue hasn't come in to be able to support that contractual agreement, you're not going to overcommit yourself when Jessica writes the agreement and say, well, we're going to pay you regardless. It's based on the tax revenue that's coming in is how he's going to get hit. So the more he performs, the more likely he is to get his money back.
Well, and that leads me to my next question. Thank you. Which is, why is it to their advantage to have Eric do that then? Would it have been to our advantage or another advantage if we had our own person so that there's less risk for Chris and his company?
So I can just tell you that as a practical matter, I almost always see the developer's representative come up with those initial numbers because they're the ones who know best what the value is, what they anticipate the increase in the value is going to be, and have it be at least at the beginning. So they pay a consultant to provide you with their anticipated numbers, and they present it to the assessor, like Suzanne said, who says, yeah, those are credible, or no, they're not. And so that's just for what it's worth. That's normally how it works at the beginning, but you don't pay for them to come up with those numbers.
No, they
Okay.
did that on their own.
That's right.
So are you saying though that let's say right now it's like 14 million some odd dollars, right?
Their cost of their infrastructure, well, they've said
The
it's
request.
actually 18 million, but
It's now 18 million?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, last time. was
But that's
14.
not what you'll see in the development and TIF plan. They said, because the township board had discussed 14 million.
Correct.
And so 14 million is what's in the plan, not
Okay.
what the developer's saying their escalated costs have been and which they're saying is now 18 million. That's not what's in the plan. The 14 million is.
So it would be 14 million.
Yep.
So was that amount reviewed by our assessor? You mentioned an assessor.
Yes, so your assessor reviewed Eric Helzer's numbers and checked them to make sure that he felt comfortable with the numbers. And Brian Reed may be able to provide more detail.
Yeah, our assessor, Ted, reviewed the numbers in terms of, does this make sense? The developer has intimate knowledge of what what their project entails and the investment that they're putting in and the cost of the project as far as the tables for value that's going to be created. They come up with an estimate. Ted worked it over. We did make some adjustments, up or down on different things based on, based on what the assessor considers, valued, depending on the use or the type of buildings or that type of thing. So these are still projections, but they have been vetted by our assessor.
Great, great. Now, let's say, hypothetical, the I property, is that the other property that's in the corridor?
Yep, Brookside
Let's say
Crossing.
they say a month from now, we want in. So how does that work in terms of how would we have to set aside funds for them as well? How would that work if somebody else came in a month from, if the I people said, well, we want to build, and they're sort of kind of like what Delta Crossing is. It's not a blighted area. There was no gas station or anything like that on it where things need to be done to the land, as far as I know. It's just a fresh ground land. So what would happen if they were to approach us and say, I want in?
So the only two tax capture areas that so you have the whole development area where you
Correct.
can spend money for infrastructure. The only two properties that could have public infrastructure kind of facilitate redevelopment on private property to, could put that public infrastructure in would be Delta Crossings and Brookside Crossings, the I property, because those are the ones that you're capturing taxes from.
Right.
And so,
But the tax capture is not higher on Brookside Crossing.
Correct.
Because there's nothing on it.
correct.
But let's say they want to put something on.
Yep.
in
And,
a month.
and we speculated like what a build out might happen. So that's in the numbers. And so you would look at the budget that you have for the authority and say, well, do we want to help pay for the public infrastructure for that project? So it's identified as a potential eligible expense, as a potential eligible project, and you are capturing taxes from that parcel. So you could decide to enter into a development and reimbursement agreement with that developer for Brookside Crossings to do that. Having said that, there is not dollar numbers kind of identified in this development and TIF plan specifically for Brookside Crossings.
Right. There's no Eric, basically. Did I get his name right? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm horrible
yeah,
at
there's
that.
not-
So there's
so-
been no Eric.
So, but you
Work
could
done.
say, so for example, you have 3 million for Lansing Mall, and let's say nothing happens with Lansing Mall, and you say, okay, well, we're okay with 3 million to Brookside Crossings for whatever. You could do that. You could decide to forego a township project to be able to facilitate the development for Brookside Crossings, but there's not enough money in the way that it's with the project list for the township and the project list for Delta Crossings and identifying Lansing Mall. There's not a dollar amount identified for Brookside Crossings in the plan.
Okay. So if that did happen, is that something that we would need to go back to the public for a public hearing? If we wanted to
Amend your plan.
add on a new
No,
set of
be-
financials or?
No, you wouldn't, it would just be a matter, if you wanted to collect more taxes above the ceiling that you've already set. So if you said they're gonna come in and they're gonna build everything out in the next 5 years, and they really want us to go full in on this infrastructure, but if we do that, but we don't want to give up our township projects. And we've already gotten this contract with Delta Crossings. So it's, their investment's gonna go above, and we could capture more monies from them. Then you would go back through the process of amending your development and TIF plan. Well, your TIF plan actually, because they're already identified in the development plan. You would have to go back into the TIF plan and increase the ceiling to be able to do more of that tax capture, to be able to provide it for Brookside Crossings.
And yes, that would begin the process over and there would be another public hearing.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. And sorry for all the questions.
No.
I'm just trying to be as clear as I can. So I want to talk about the taxing jurisdiction. So forgive me if I kind of go around. I'm just trying to stick with my notes. On the document, it says each taxing jurisdiction is contacted to provide an opportunity to meet before the public hearing to discuss the plan adoption and agreements. So what date is that? When is that happening?
So that is right in the statute. That's exactly how it's worded, right in the statute. So what that means is that you reach out, or Suzanne or your representatives reach out to all the taxing jurisdictions and set up meetings. And if they want to meet, they can occur at any time during that period of time leading up to the public hearing. Oftentimes they continue after as well. So for what it's worth, that's something that occurs. I don't know if you've set those yet or not.
So
Have you?
we've already met with the library board and we shared with them the numbers and what impact it might have on them. I had a discussion already. And then we're working on setting up meetings with the county and LCC, and if Manager Reed wants to comment on that.
Oh, I've had a meeting with the county administration and LCC so far, just to tell them, kind of give them a heads up of what's coming down the road, and then we'll be setting up additional meetings now that we have a, specific plan. So as of right now, the library board's had more information than the other two taxing jurisdictions.
Do they have to make a decision before the public hearing?
No.
At what point do they have to make a decision?
So
If
the law says
they're gonna
that
be
they
in a-
have, after adoption of the plan, they have 60 days to appeal. So they even have time, they are opt out. So
I was
they
gonna say
have,
appeal, because,
or opt out.
Opt out.
Yes.
Right. Yep. But oftentimes they end up negotiating with you and you'll have a good sense of that prior to the public hearing. That's the goal, is to know whether they're in or out. A lot of places have a policy and we'll be able to tell you right out of the gate, we opt out every time, so don't count on us, or we're willing to, be in halfway, we'll enter into an agreement with you. So you should have a good sense of that before the public hearing.
good, because I think it's helpful I can only speak for me, to know where they stand on that, so that I have a full understanding of the whole package and how it's gonna work, who's in, who's out. So I think it's critical to know that component and not be surprised by it after the fact or later. So I think that's good. The other question I have, under the developing the plan, you've got things listed about the variables like administrative cost and contingency, pass-through duration. But one that's not in there, and we talked about this already a little bit, I was surprised that the development agreement is not listed, because it's something that's gonna happen. And, but it's not gonna happen before the public hearing.
I
Right.
don't know which section of the
I'm
procedure
just
you're referring
looking
to.
at, page 2, where you talk about, you're just talking about,
Just the variables that go into.
yeah, just
Oh,
things that
okay.
you can consider.
Development
Okay.
plan.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's not required, obviously, but I was just wondering why it wasn't listed there. It's something that will
Because
happen.
it may or may not happen. I mean, I guess it's such a separate animal. If you go through the statute.
But it's not common to every.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Nope, not necessarily. If you, again, not that you would ever do this unless you couldn't sleep, but if you read through the statute,
No, thank you.
there's all these different ways you can finance things. There's all these different things you can do with your corridor improvement authority. So there's not necessarily always a development agreement, and it really is a separate animal. It's a mechanism you can use to, contribute these public tax dollars toward economic development. And so it's later that you really shouldn't even have it listed in this section, because it doesn't have anything. It's got to be in the plan, at least in theory, but I wouldn't put a development agreement specifically within that portion of that.
But what is the goal date to have the development agreement done?
That's
By
really
the
up to you
CIA
all.
board?
I mean,
Is this on the list of your timeline, Suzanne, at all?
No, because you've got to set up, once you've set up your funding mechanism, right? So that's this development plan. then you can start talking about a development agreement. But until you have money in the bank to go negotiate with, there's no point negotiating until you know you've got some money to talk about.
Mhm.
So that's the reason why you don't put the development agreement until, you know, what the taxing jurisdictions are going to do and what you as a body, as a township board are going to do. There's no point doing that agreement yet. So the agreement comes later for that very reason, is that, and then you have to decide, conditions could change. I mean, you've got to decide when you're looking at the development agreement, you know, again, you're expressing an intent in the development and TIF plan,
Mhm.
because you've thought about it,
Mhm.
but the commitment doesn't come until later because there's going to be concerns like making sure that tax appeals don't happen.
Yes.
Or, right? So
Right.
that's not something,
Good point.
that's not something that would be in the development and TIF plan. Because those are specific contractual things that you're going to lay out as a body about what your expectations are for that particular developer and that project.
Okay.
Those details don't go into a general plan like that.
Okay. And when a development agreement is established, is it proactive and not a reactive date? Is it a reset? So in other words, is it going to be, let's go back and cover some costs from 6 months ago, infrastructure cost?
That's something you can negotiate, but you are able to go back and reimburse, hence the term, for prior costs.
And has that request come up from Delta Crossing?
I mean, generally speaking, just so you know how it works, you make them spend the money first. And they
Yes.
come to you with receipts and documentation, and if that's to your satisfaction, you reimburse them. So it's always going to be an ask for a reimburse. It's never an advancement or in advance.
Right, because they're
Okay,
gonna
yeah.
have to get this, use their own dollars,
That's right.
and we will reimburse. But I was just wondering, can they come back? Because this sounds like it's gonna take a little minute to get to this development agreement.
Mhm.
But the project is underway, obviously. So I'm just wondering if they could then come to us and say, well, you know, we want to go back to where we started. And we want to get reimbursed for dollars already
Yeah,
spent.
they can.
So my question is, has that conversation taken place? And is there any expectation that we will, or we're considering going retroactive?
So you have to, just like you are going to bond for a project, there's the engineering involved to build the project, there's the bids you gotta take, you gotta build the project, and then you're making those bond payments later on. This is kind of the same thing, except for the developer's doing it. The developer has paid for the engineering costs, paid for the survey work, paid for that underground infrastructure in the street.
I get that. I'm just asking, are they expecting reimbursement?
I would say, yeah, because they've, I mean, that's where the 14 million, that's what that's for, is to
Well,
pay
I
for
think
that.
the reason I ask, and I'm not trying to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I can recall when we started this and we had conversations about the various phases that, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I want to say that phase one, they were not asking. But I could be wrong. I will check my notes. I keep thorough notes, that there was no request for that phase. They didn't need it. They were going to do that project, that part of it on their own. And it was going to be for future phases. I don't remember if it was 2 through 5 at the time, but I'm pretty sure that I heard phase one, we're good.
So because I wasn't here, I can't respond to say what they were, you know, what the conversation at the time was. I mean, certainly
Chris would have,
they could answer that if you wanted them to answer that, but.
yes, please.
All right.
Hi, Fawn.
Hi,
Yes.
Chris.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are
Oh,
you?
sorry.
Good to see you again.
Same here. Yes, actually, if you recall, we elected not to go for the brownfield and pursue just an overall CIA and TIF. And if you recall, you asked me, well, why are you starting? I says, well, I'm taking a leap of faith here by doing this because, you know, at that point, it was more about keeping the retailers in Delta rather than them shutting their doors and moving on. So it was kind of a timing thing where we had to make a decision to either wait, but then the timing wasn't right for them. So we needed to act. And that's why I said, I'm taking a leap of faith here.
Right,
So
but were you, am I mistaken, Chris? I was led that there would be no request to reimburse for phase one.
that's incorrect. No.
Okay, so that's incorrect. Okay,
Yes.
so I will double check my notes.
Yep.
I appreciate
Yeah,
that. That
no
was
worries.
just not my
Mhm.
understanding, but thank you. I
It was the
appreciate it.
brownfield is that we elected to back off on.
Well, it's not a brownfield project.
Yes, it was. It was. Because there, and we can show, we did, it is contaminated site.
Yeah,
Okay.
flower line property there.
Yeah. The flower line.
Flowerland, thank
Yeah.
you. Good job, good job. Let me just see if I have, and I appreciate your indulgence. And I think the only other thing that I just wanted to say is, and I've said this to Chris, I've said this to others, I am totally in support of development. I love that you found Delta attractive enough to bring something as beautiful as you put out there. My challenge for me is making sure that this financial arrangement is prudent and sound, because this is not for a year or 2 years or 4 years. I'll be long gone from this board. I hope I'll still be on earth, but I'll be long gone from this board. And I don't want to leave someone with something that's a burden later down the road, because none of us have a crystal ball. We don't. But I absolutely think the project is beautiful. My challenge is I need to be really certain that we're on sound financial ground. And so those are the challenges that I personally have. And my other challenge is, when we started this, we were all, it was very exciting for everybody, for all of us, it still is. But there was really a commitment to transparency and inclusion. At least that's how I felt. And so I thought it was going to be something that we worked collectively together. I never thought that there would be a public hearing in which the CIA board would be presenting its document to the public to come and give public feedback that does not include feedback from the board here that's sitting here. We will have an opportunity to do that. I totally get that. But the public doesn't know that. They don't know that. They don't get that. They don't understand that. They're going to think we put our green stamp on that. And so they're going to come in, and that's what they're going to think. They're going to think we stand behind it and we're all good. And we do, by many of the parts we do. And I know at the public hearing, they will come, they'll have their say, and then we'll have our say. And then we kind of can try to get some changes. I don't know how easy that's going to be, honestly, to tell you the truth. I think that's a mountain to be able to get some things changed, but I know we'll do what we can. Everybody operates from their heart here. This is a good board, and they do. And so I just thought that we would have one opportunity before a public hearing to meet with the CIA board and to go through the plan together, put our own twist in it together as a joint board, and then present that to the public, so that when I'm in Meyer or Horak or wherever I am, I can stand tall and say, yeah, we did this together, and let me explain why. And I can't do that because I haven't had a chance to give my feedback or incorporate any of the changes that I'd want to see into the document. So those are my comments. I don't have anything else. Thank you, Ken.
Other questions? Beth?
Okay, let's go back to the basic of what happens after December 31st, 2021, if we don't create the TIF. What happens to the increased revenue and property value of the Delta Crossings property? Where does that increased revenue go?
Nothing gets captured until you have everything done here.
Right, so it would go into the general fund for the
So
township and then the other.
I just want to
taxing
make sure I
authorities.
understand what you're envisioning. So you have an authority, you have a district, but you're saying if you don't actually adopt a plan,
Mhm.
then you can't do anything.
Right. No,
So-
that's not
It would-
hop ahead.
It
Yeah.
would reset the, so
The
the
base
base, there would be
value,
no
right.
capture of any value that's been created this year. So then it would
Right.
reset the base.
So it would be essentially
For-
100% pass through to the township and to the county and that sort of thing. Because we wouldn't lose that money. So my point is that revenue would not be lost to the ether. It would still come in. It would go to its taxing authorities, but it would not be a part of the CIA authority. They would not have control of those funds. Is that correct?
That's correct. But then you could
Right.
also, the township board could not use that money.
For economic development,
Correct.
for reimbursement of private projects.
That's right. You
And that
can't,
sort of thing.
that's right.
But
You
if
have
we
no
wanted to
authority
put
do
a
that.
sidewalk somewhere, we could use that money for a sidewalk. That's a public piece of infrastructure.
You couldn't. So your corridor improvement authority, this is an odd, I guess, scenario that you're presenting. So I guess I'm not quite sure how this would play out, but a sidewalk within the district, or what do you?
Well, say for instance, a resident comes to me and says, where is this money going? If this is increased property value and this money is to go into the pot here in the township and the other taxing authorities to pay for fire and police and infrastructure and all the things that we pay for with tax money. That's our revenue.
Right.
And because of the Headley Amendment, we don't have a lot of options to increase our revenue. And so development is one of those great options that someone comes in and invests in our community. The property values go up and we all benefit. So if someone says to me, well, where's this money going? And why is this money not going to pay for my fire and my police and my water and sewer and all the things that our revenue pays for? Where is it going? It's going into this other fund. So if we don't do the TIF, the money doesn't disappear. It doesn't go nowhere. We still retain our money. Yes,
Yeah, the money,
Yes.
the money doesn't go nowhere.
right, right. It's
Right.
still there. Okay. So, but I'm interested that you said that you can't have a TIF without a development. So we can't create a TIF, capture that money and just let it sit in a fund while we discuss how we want to
That's
spend
correct.
it?
That's correct. I mean, what would be included within your TIF calculations, your budget, if you didn't have some idea of the scope of what you wanted to do with it?
Well, I thought the TIF specified that you have that base of what the taxes are now, and then whatever goes over that.
Right,
That goes
but the
into the
TIF plan
fund.
is more than just the tables that you're talking about. So the TIF plan actually spells out how you're gonna spend the money. And maybe it would be helpful if you saw a TIF plan, which I'd be more than happy to share with you, like a generic example.
Well, I've looked at through ours, the one.
And they've got theirs.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
they've got
it
the
spells out,
development-
it's more than just the table.
So the state law requires that you have a development plan for a TIF plan. So you have to have a development plan as part of the state law. It requires a development plan if you have the TIF.
So I have to say how I'm gonna spend the money before I can say how I'm gonna collect the money.
They go hand in hand. I mean, to the point
Yeah.
of where am I getting my money from and how am I gonna spend it? Right? Those two things go together.
Right. Okay, so back many, many moons ago, I remember we talked about phases. We talked about TIFs in phases. We talked about creating the corridor authority in phases and that sort of thing. Was the CIA board given the option to do a TIF on phase 1 of Delta Crossings instead of the entirety of Delta Crossings? And is there any advantage to doing that? Capture the value of what's been developed and then later on capture other values as they go up? Or is it more advantageous to do the whole property in one TIF?
From the ease of administration and in negotiation with the taxing jurisdictions, it's easier to have it all in one at one time. Because phasing, if you're increasing the parcels that you've already identified in your TIF planning or adding to it, you've got to go back through the entire notification process, the public hearing process. It's a whole nother, it's
Okay.
all this all over again.
Okay, all right, that's good to know. So you said that Mr. Helzer helped with the numbers for the tables at the end of the development plan that were the values. So the value that they see of their property going up as they develop it and that sort of thing, but not the costs. And the costs will come in when we put together the reimbursement agreement.
That's correct. And there would be a
Development agreement.
specific line item in there that says when they have to provide you with their receipts and explanation of expenditures.
Okay.
And then you do your own sort of internal analysis, or your staff does, about whether those were eligible, and then
Okay.
you reimburse.
Because I believe that's something that we've already asked for a couple times and we have not been able to secure those. So it's good to know that there is still a mechanism that
Oh,
we
yeah.
can still see the costs.
Yeah, it normally wouldn't be a part of
The,
this.
the costs are in
process.
the plan
But
from
they
the
have to provide
developer.
The receipts.
Yeah,
That's what she said.
that's what I want to see. I want to see.
Right,
the
but why,
receipts.
why would we have requested the receipts already?
You wouldn't.
Oh,
I'm just
sorry, I'll let
asking
you
what-
speak for
Well, I want to see the numbers so that I know that the money, the taxpayer money that we are spending on this infrastructure, that we're spending the amount that the infrastructure cost. That we're not spending $14 million for $3 million of
Yeah,
infrastructure.
and that's totally fair.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
because, you know, the difference here is this that you put in your presentation, this says reimbursement. So this says reimbursement, so we're using tax dollars to reimburse the private developer because he put infrastructure into his private development that he needed to have for his private development. But as far as I know, and I haven't been on the board a whole year yet, but as far as I know, the township didn't have any plans to develop that property beforehand. So we didn't contract with him to put the infrastructure in there to attract his development. We didn't say, please finance this and we will reimburse you. He came to us and said, I want to put this in and I want to be reimbursed.
And that's very typical.
Okay, but it's not something that Delta Township has ever done before. Because whenever we have, I've been told, if a subdivision goes in, then the developer puts in the infrastructure, they put in the roads, and they build that into the cost of the people who are buying the home.
And that is a totally different animal in the sense
Mhm.
that with a developer, you would have a development agreement up front. It's nice because you get to do that all up front and require them to pay, pay for the infrastructure. Do you want sidewalks, and you can do that all pursuant to a big contract with them up front. That's very different from this mechanism, which again is the statutory mechanism. It's very heavy on the procedure, but it's just a different mechanism.
And for economic development, it's to attract development and redevelopment.
And then reimburse. It's always about the reimbursement. So
Probably the best example is our TIF, the brownfield TIF across the street, where the TIF plan identified eligible expenses
Mhm.
and the plan identified what the developer could receive. They had to do the work, provide receipts and
Yep.
documentation of everything that was done and that it met the statute and the plan. And then they've been reimbursed moving forward.
Okay. So my next question is, with this development plan that Suzanne, that you wrote, it says in here that there are 3 kinds of projects that are eligible under this plan. And it lists Delta Crossings, Brookside Crossings, and the Lansing Mall. Yep. Now, help me understand if this board and the CIA board expressed that the east side of the corridor is a priority for redevelopment because that's where the property values are not increasing.
Yep.
How does this plan provide for putting projects or for putting money into the east side, east of Elmwood? Because I don't see that here. These projects that were on this list.
Yeah, so those projects are they're in the table. So 2 things, Delta Crossings and Brookside Crossings is listed as 2 of those 3 because that's where you're capturing the revenue from. So you can spend money there, right? You can't spend it on other projects
For
that don't have
reimbursement
it.
of private
Reimbursement,
investment.
Yes.
Okay.
And then finding the table. And the projects table in Appendix J,
That was the good appendix, it had all the good stuff in it.
Table 2, the projects list. So when we went through that list, I'm missing one of my pages, but on the projects list, you'll see kind of hard costs and soft costs. So
Right.
this project list, you'll see in the fourth column over, it says township allowable project estimates. You'll see money budgeted, for example, 1.8 million for streets and streetscapes and the 300,000 for utilities and the $1 million for long-term maintenance of the infrastructure.
And that's across the 20 years, right?
That's across the 20 years.
That's not 1 year.
No, this is anticipating like in the
Yeah.
next, from 2021 to 2041, kind of what are the kind of projects you would do? So those are, and then on the next page, you have studies and plans for $660,000, which could include the corridor plan, market studies, traffic studies, wayfinding plan, design guidelines, access management plan, economic studies, whatever you wanted to do with that. So that's where those numbers show up.
Yeah. And on that same table, that's where we see the $13.79 million over 20 years for the Delta Crossings allowable projects. That would be to reimburse for infrastructure that has already been put in through phase 1.
That would be for the entirety of the public infrastructure that they're putting in to be able to facilitate the development and that development then helps generate the revenues that go into the plan. So it's kind of chicken and the egg, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's all good.
Yep. But if we wanted to, we could negotiate less there later on in the development agreement and put more money toward these other ones. If we wanted to, if this board decided that that was a priority, we don't have to go with these numbers.
You could if you wanted to. That's
Okay.
correct.
Do we have to change the development plan before we vote on it, before we adopt it with these tables to change those numbers?
No.
Okay, so they can be fluid later on.
Yep. These are just estimates.
Okay,
So it's for planning, as they say, for planning purposes only.
okay, so that's the kind of plan. It's not a plan to execute, it's a plan to what you just said, I'm sorry. To a projection, yes.
Yes.
Okay. And my next question, a year ago, August 2020, before you were brought on, I believe.
Okay.
The board was presented at 2 different meetings, 2 different PowerPoint presentations by Mr. Hauser. And some of the material that was in those PowerPoint presentations, and I don't have printed copies, but I do have electronic copies of them. Some of that material was in the development plan that you drafted.
Okay.
Like there was an image specifically that had like the pass through and that sort of thing. And I just wondered, did you use those PowerPoint presentations as references for when you were composing the development plan?
I think I'm just trying to see which image. I'm not aware of an image that we pulled from the PowerPoints. I mean, certainly we reviewed the PowerPoints. I don't think it would be good to know if you think there's one in there, but I don't recall having an image in there from any of the PowerPoints that
Okay.
Mr. Helzer did.
I'm kind of revisiting one of the points that trustee Brewer made about, who is driving this conversation, who's making these decisions, choosing the 20 years, choosing the contingency amounts and all that sort of thing, where this all came from. Because I don't think it was the CIA board. The CIA board didn't have input on this plan until after you presented the completed draft to them, right?
No, they discussed all the variables before the plan was drafted.
At our joint meeting?
No, they
Okay.
had a meeting, they had a special meeting, so you had your joint meeting,
Mhm.
to remember the timeline, but they had a special meeting in addition to their regular meeting
Okay,
where the variables were discussed. They provided that input. We took the input from the joint meeting with discussion about Delta crossings and Brookside crossings and the Lansing Mall. We went back and evaluated whether or not it made sense to include Lansing Mall in the TIF, which it didn't. And so, and the balance of it is, I mean, some of it is kind of typical language that you put in. So the bulk of the development plan is really taken straight from the legislation about, it has this criteria for CIA. So all the language kind of like for the whole middle part of it is following all of the criteria that's provided by the state law with the section cited in it for the bulk of the development plan. So none of that language was provided by the developer, and it was developed by Progressive.
Okay, all right. I was surprised to see the similarities too, and so I don't know, maybe it's like a Google image that lots of people use to describe pass-throughs or something like that.
Yeah, it's pretty common. I mean, there's only so much to these, so it's not,
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't spend 100 hours writing this plan. I mean,
Okay.
it's because it's like, here's what the state law says, does it meet or doesn't, which financing methods are you going to use? Like
Mhm.
the township board said, we don't want a bond. Okay, so
Right.
bonding isn't listed in here as a potential revenue source.
Yeah, and I should add to that, exactly. So the statute says your development plan must include, and there's this long list, your TIF plan must include, so they do all look a lot alike. So.
Okay, and I believe that answers all my questions. Thank you very
Okay.
much for your patience.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, I move adoption of the resolution that establishes the CIA Development TIP Plan public hearing for November 15th, 2021 at 6 p.m. Is there support?
Support.
There is support. Any additional discussion? I would just say thank you once again, ladies, for the information, the presentation. I know that you both drove over on September 20th, so I do apologize that you guys had to sit and not have a chance to present and everything. But I think that this, a lot of work has gone into this. And while this is new and that Delta hasn't done a TIF and a corridor improvement authority, the concept of when individuals, when corporations come and want to expand in our township, we have worked with them. General Motors came and said, we'll invest hundreds of millions of dollars and create thousands of jobs in exchange for it. We want these incentives, this infrastructure upgrades and things of that nature. Part suppliers came and did the same thing. In recent years, the Magna plant came and said, we'll invest millions and millions in your township and create jobs in exchange for incentives. So it's something that we have considered and we have done to create jobs and to improve the tax base of our township in the past. We have done it recently on commercial properties. It's been talked about across the street. We did a brownfield plan for redeveloping that property to build a new hotel. Down Saginaw, when Morley came in and bought the old school, we approved a brownfield to help renovate that to create jobs and bring new amenities into our township. And this is no different. We had a developer who come and said he wants to invest $200 million in our community to create just through construction jobs and then all the various entities that are opening up. And I know he's in conversations with other stuff that would create even more long-term jobs in the area. So, and he's asking for some incentives to help with the public financing for the infrastructure with it. So it's not unusual. It's nothing uncommon. And at the end of the day, we still in this township are having $200 million invested in our community in exchange for they're asking that a small amount of the taxes that they will be paying and not anybody else. I see comments sometimes in social media that they don't want their taxes going to pay for their public road. Nobody's taxes, my taxes that I pay as a resident of Delta won't go to pay for that road. It'll be the taxes that Chris is paying will go to pay for that public road. So it's a good deal overall. I think that the CIA board, as I said at the beginning, really asked great pertinent questions, really explored each of these the variables that went into the plan. So the idea that they just blindly rubber stamped whatever got thrown in front of them, isn't true. And Chris, I'm glad to hear that everybody say they support your project. They don't believe you need any money. They don't believe that the development would stop if they said no, but they love your project. So I guess that's a step forward that everybody likes what you're up to. So with that, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Supervisor Fletcher,
Yes.
trustee Cascarella,
Yes.
trustee Bowen,
Yes.
trustee Brewer,
No.
trustee Mohica,
Yes.
treasurer Fedorowala, clerk Clark is yes, motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and thank you all. Moving down the agenda, item number 17, case number 8-21-10, a request to expand the existing Delta Township wastewater treatment plant, requiring an amendment to an existing special land use permit for a major essential service, and the planning department recommends that we approve. What's the pleasure of the board on this item? Andrea?
I move that the Delta Township Board approve the special land use permit for essential services major to allow for the expansion of the Delta Township wastewater treatment plant as described in case number 08-21-10 for the following two reasons that listed in our packet and with the conditions of approval, two of which are also listed.
Is there support?
Yes, support.
There is support. Any discussion? See none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Case number 8-21-11, a special land use permit request for a 130-foot wire radio communications monopole to be located at the Delta Township wastewater treatment plant. Planning department recommends approval. Is somebody like to make a motion? Karen?
I move that the Delta Township Board approve for a wireless communication facility as described in case number 08-21-11 for the following reasons. Number one, the specific use standards in section 8.67 have been met. Number two, the special land use standards set forth in section 7.03 of the Delta Township zoning ordinance have been met. And then there's conditions of approval. Is that, yeah, that goes with that. So number one was failure of the applicant to comply with any of the provisions required by the Delta Township zoning ordinance or any stipulations added by the Delta Township Planning Commission or Township Board shall constitute grounds for termination of the special land use permit.
Is there support?
Support.
There is support. Discussion. See none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. The final consideration for the Delta Crossings Phase 1.3 Building G drive-through. The planning department recommends that the board approve the special land use permit request for a drive-through as is described in the case. Anybody on the board would like to make a motion? Rhonda?
I move that the Delta Township Board, I'm reading it as it's written here, sorry about that. Delta Township Board approve the special land permit request for a drive-through as described in case number 8-21-12, which would be located on a portion of parcel number 04000930090-01 for the following 4 reasons. Can I do that?
Yeah,
Great.
you can say this.
Subject to the following 2 stipulations.
Support.
Has been moved and supported. Is there any discussion?
I just
Yes.
have one comment. I just want to tell, since Chris is here, that entryway, their entry exit to your development. I know it's got the little block there to try to get people to turn right onto Saginaw Highway for safety. I've already seen 2 people turn left.
Oh, we got a sign coming.
Good.
It's actually gonna be a pole sign, right? It's gonna be
Excellent.
right in
I was
there.
gonna
That's why the
suggest-
concrete- Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we need more
They're not- yeah,
signage.
They're not gonna make a left after that. pole
Oh,
sign.
good.
It's gonna say no left,
Oh,
so.
hopefully, or
Yeah,
we
yeah.
need somebody out there to like shake
Yeah.
their finger at us or
It's
something.
either
I
that or
saw the
I'm
same thing.
gonna pop a column on there.
Something.
I'll stop them.
All right, good, thank you.
And Chris, since we're on that topic, I don't know if the temporary sign is still up, but that was blocking the view. So you may want to take down that temporary sign in the short
Oh, no.
because it was blocking your view. If it's still up, I don't know if it
The
is.
monument signs finally, the balance are coming, they showed up today, they're getting installed Thursday and Friday, so.
So that was
So
good.
Excellent.
lighted signs are coming. so.
Yay.
Any other questions? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Item number 20, the final action for West Lansing Development 3 LLC rezoning request in case number 7-21-09. And the planning department recommends that the board approve. It's a pleasure of the board. Manny.
I move that the Delta Township Board approve the West Lansing Retail Development 3 LLC request to rezone 6.41 acres in section 9 of the township from AG2 agricultural residential to RM multiple family residential as described in case number 07-21-09, being that the proposed rezoning request complies with the criteria specified for rezonings in section 16.04. Criteria for amendment to the official zoning map of the Delta Township zoning ordinance.
Support.
There is support. Any discussion? See none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Item number 21, approval of the 2021, the 2026 Delta Township Strategic Plan, and the manager's office recommends approval. What's the pleasure of the board on that one? Karen?
I move that the Delta Township Board approve the 2021 through 2026 strategic plan.
Is there support?
Support.
There is support. Any discussion? See none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. And item 22, the transmittal of the 2022 to 2027 capital improvements plan. The planning department recommends that the board receive this. It's the pleasure of the board on that item. Fonda.
I move that the Delta Township Board transmittal of the 2022 through 2027 capital improvement plan.
Is there support?
Support.
There is support. Any discussion? Yes, Beth.
Is there any staff person present who could give us, the major highlights of this?
Sure. Gary's here. He loves to give highlights.
When I already communicated with Mary Warman, my name was misspelled.
Yes, I apologize for that.
That's
We'll
okay.
fix that before it's
Just a
posted.
little thing, but
So the capital improvements plan is indicated in the plan. It's a 6-year plan. It's required by the Planning Enabling Act that the Planning Commission every year adopt a plan for the ensuing 6 years for all the capital projects in the township. So the process involves a committee of planning commissioners, also made up of a number of department heads as well. They meet and review all the projects submitted by the various department heads. And then there's a ranking system that's been developed by staff that's utilized in order to rank the project. So excuse me, on chapter 4 of the plan, beginning on what would be page 10 of the document, you have the beginning of the general fund project rankings. And those are that's the only fund that we actually rank the projects, because utility funds, water and sewer, are called enterprise funds, and we build those projects as necessary. So we very rarely have to rank those, because the utilities department and the engineering department gives us tells us when we need them, and so that's when we build them. So the project rankings for it's the 2022 is what we call the capital budget. So that's what you use as a township board in developing your annual budget. And so the project listings show the rankings for the top projects that hopefully are included in the budget. And then you decide, even though there's recommended funding levels for each of these by the various departments, the board decides how much money to allocate to each of those projects in your budget document. So again, this is an advisory document only. So it's for your use in determining in the budget what kind of projects you want to fund in the ensuing year. So top projects are replacement of the aerial platform fire apparatus. Well, we know that's a big priority for the board, and that's probably going to happen. Again, the second project was the replacement of the pumper tanker truck 413. And we do have fire representation if you want to talk about any of those. Replacement of the the sheriff's station. That's been a project that's been on the list for a long time, and we're finally able to address that. There's been already a lot of movement toward design and things like that. So most of the projects, again, are fire and public safety related. Those are the top priorities, as you would expect, in terms of what the Planning Commission is recommending. But we also have a couple of park projects, Delta Mills Playground Restroom building, and the North Canal Road land acquisition for parks. And then several other projects that deal with shared youth pathways and things like that. So it's kind of covers the gamut of what we do. So money's expensed. So
Is there a document that talks about all the documents that we have? So we have this one, we have the master plan, we have the strategic plan. Is there one that I could refer to so that I could get a sense of all of our documents?
There's not a document. We do have a section on the website that has all of our plans.
Okay.
It's something, I mean, we could put together kind of a summary of all of them. I mean, some of them are statutory. I mean, the capital improvement plan, the statutory,
Yeah.
obviously the master plan is, I believe, the parks and rec plan. I don't know if it's
That's another one. Yeah.
statutory, but I know it's you know, best practice to have that updated every 5 years.
But they all go together to give a picture of our vision for Delta Township, where we are, where we're going and that sort of thing. And it would be nice to have something that, yeah, I could hand to people that I could refer to. Just, you know, not to make work for your staff, but it just, you know, and again, it's my first year in this and I feel like these are coming fast and furious and there are so many of them that I want to make sure that I know what they all are. So, but thank you, Gary, for that overview. I
Sure.
appreciate that.
Any
Any
other
other
questions?
questions for Gary? Being done. Thanks, Gary.
Sure.
Any other questions from the board? Being done. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Managers report. What do you have for us, Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor and board members. Just a couple things tonight. I gave you all copies of the Michigan Municipal League core legislative principles. These are what we voted on as the township's delegate. So these are very similar to the previous at least couple years in terms of their principles. A lot of them are, we kind of have reflected in many of our various plans that Trustee Bowen mentioned. So we do hit on some of these, or quite a few of these, some more than others. Obviously, infrastructure has been a major focus the last year or two. Will continue to be the next couple of years, walkability, that type of thing. So this is just for your information. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. GM started, employees started back today, so that's a good thing. The bad thing is I saw they're not sure if that, you know, there's no guarantee that that will continue long term. So hopefully they get the supply chain issues resolved to where they aren't going back and forth. So also of note, they did start demolition on some of the houses along Willow for the new Redwood second phase. So see a lot of activity out there. And then Gary mentioned the aerial apparatus. We did already receive some paperwork for that grant that we received in the state budget. So we'll be, Courtney will be working on that. We'll work to get those funds and hopefully get that ordered yet in 2021. So with that, be happy to answer any other questions.
Any other questions for Brian?
Just a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you to Brian and Alana and Mary and Colin. They were at the MML conference last week. They worked our booth like no other. They really did. They did a great job at the booth and
Well, we would want if they've done a great job.
still trying to figure out why we didn't win, but we should have won. But no, there was some really stiff competition, but I want to thank them. And they also, Brian's office was really supportive. I had an opportunity to speak before the Black Caucus on the last day and about the township's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Brian's staff, they prepared the presentation. I didn't have to do anything, which I love because they always do everything. And they were present for it. So I just wanted to personally thank you for your support.
Thank you. And Trustee Brewer did a great job representing the township with that presentation. And a funny story, my mother and my sister both live in Rochester Hills, who won the Community of Excellence Award. So my mother this morning told me she attended coffee with the mayor. So she gave him a bit of gas about beating out Delta Township. So he laughed and said he thought it was a very good project. But I do appreciate the work Mary and Alana did putting that together, especially the video. And of course, Ernie West, our engineer, and Jennifer Bernard, and that was really a labor of love. They put together a lot of that project, well, almost all of that project, and a lot of the coordination and stuff that is not seen. Jennifer Bernard, especially coordinating a lot of the meetings and notes and grants and that type of thing. So really appreciate their work, and it was a fun process to go through, even though we didn't win.
No, I think next year we've got to have T-shirts, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't help that they threw out T-shirts to the audience, you know?
Yeah, they bribed.
Yeah, and they had chocolates at their table. So, but really good.
Okay, any other questions or comments for Brian? Any other board member comments before we have final public comment? No, any final public comment? We'll see no further business before us. We are adjourned.